Hello friends, first of all, welcome up all of you in this video lecture series of 12th Commerce Economics. Before starting this lecture, I just revised what we studied in previous lectures. We studied in previous lecture some important concepts of the fourth topic of economics, that is supply analysis. That is what is meant by demand, what is meant by stock, what is meant by individual demand, what is meant by market demand, what is meant by what are the determinants of demand, law of demand with assumption, with proper explanation of schedule and table and graph. So the next thing, that is exception to the law of supply. So the first exception, supply of labor. Labor supply is the total number of hours that workers to work at a given wage rate, and it is represented graphically by supply curve, and it is represented graphically by a supply curve. In case of a labor, as the wage rate rises, the supply of labor also increases. The supply of labor also increases. If the wage rate per hour, if the wage rate per hour is 100, hours of working per day is 5 hours. Total amount of wages, that is 500 rupees. If wage rate per hour rises from 100 to 200, hours of working also rises from 5 hours to 7 hours. Total amount of wages, that is 1400. But if there is again rise in the wage rate per hour, if there is again rise in the wage rate per hour, if there is again rise in the wage rate per hour, then what happen? Or how the supply curve, that is labor supply curve, its exception to the law of supply is given when again wage rate rises from 200 rupees per hour to 300 rupees per hour. Total hours of working decreases from 7 hours to 6 hours. From 7 hours to 6 hours. So total amount of wages is 1800. Why these things happen? Because the workers would prefer leisure to work after receiving higher amount of wages. Thus, after a certain point, when wage rate rises, the supply of labor, that is working hours, tends to fall. So in table number 4.4, it can be explained: when wage rate are 100, working hours are 5, total amount of wages are 500. When working hours are 200, working wage rate per hour 200, hours of work per day 7, total wage rate 1400. But further rise in the wage rate, total hours or supply of labor fallen, that is from 7 hours to 6 hours, because after a specific time period, it is the common tendency of labor It is common tendency of labor that they don't want to work more hours, even there is rise in the wage rates. So it can explain we graphically. On y-axis we show wage rate per hour in rupees, and on x-axis supply of labors, that is hours of working. Okay, when wage rate are 100, hour of working is 5. When wage are again rises from 100 to 200, supply of labor, that is working hours, again rises to 6 hours. That is, in this situation up to, that is when wage rate are 100 and wage rate are 200, at the same time supply curve of labor goes upward. But again, if there is a rise in the wage rate from 200 to 300, supply of labor, that is working hours, fallen or decreases to 6 hours. So the supply of labor curve is backward bending. Supply of labor curve is backward bending. That is SAS1 backward bending labor supply curve. SA increasing supply curve, and AS leisure time. So this is the first exception and most important exception of law of supply, because many times question is asked on this particular concept, that is backward bending supply curve. Okay, for agree disagree purpose or for true or false, fill in the blanks. Okay, so exception to the law of supply. First exception, supply of labor. It is a common tendency of the labor, okay, as a wage rate rises, labor of working hours also rises. But at a particular situation, even there is a rise in the wage rates, working hours does not rises. Next exception, that is agricultural goods. The law of supply does not apply to agricultural goods, as they are produced in specific season and their production depends upon weather conditions. Agricultural commodities, that is fruits, vegetables, there is a particular season for mango, vegetables, jowar, bajra, wheat. But due to unfavorable changes in the weather conditions, if agricultural production is low, their supply cannot be increased even at a higher prices, because production is not possible. Next, urgent need for cash. If the seller or producer of the goods require cash immediately to perform certain functions, at that time he or she may sell his goods or product even at a below the market price. That is urgent need of cash. अगर किसी प्रोड्यूसर को, सेलर को अपने जो गुड्स और सर्विसेज है, अगर उसे किसी भी कीमत में कैश चाहिए या मनी चाहिए तो वो मार्केट प्राइस से कम प्राइस को भी अपने गुड्स सेल कर सकता है बिकॉज ऑफ अर्जेंट नीड ऑफ कैश. नेक्स्ट, पेरिशेबल गुड्स. In case of perishable goods, that is vegetables, eggs, fish, supplier, perishable नाशवंत, नाश पावणाऱ्या गोष्टी. Supplier would sell more quantities of commodities at even a lower price also to avoid a loss. For example, vegetables, eggs, fish, grapes. Okay, that is perishable goods. Next, rare articles or rare goods. The supply of rare goods cannot be increased or decreased according to its demand. The supply of rare goods cannot be increased or decreased according to its demand. Because these things are already rare, the production cannot be possible. The production cannot be possible. Even if the prices of these rare articles or rare goods rises, but due to unable to production, supply remain unchanged. For example, old coins, rare paintings, goods, etc. So these are the exception to the law of supply. The next concept, variation in supply. Variation in supply. Variation in supply. There are two concepts, variation in supply and change in supply. Variation in supply and change in supply. Variation in supply have two parts, expansion of supply and contraction of supply. Contraction of supply. So what is meant by variation? What is meant by variation? When some quantity supplied of a commodity varies due to change in its price, other factors remaining constant. Change quantity supplied may be rises or fall due to change in price, other things remaining constant. It is known as variation in supply. It is known as variation in supply. Due to change in price, quantity supplied changes. Due to change in price, if quantity supplied changes, that is maybe rise or fall in quantity supplied due to change in price, it is known as variation in supply. So variation in supply have two types, expansion of supply and contraction of supply. That is, variation in supply is new term or new concept for us, but variation in demand is not new for us. We already studied in topic number 3rd. The concept that is variation in demand. So the next concept, variation in supply. The basic difference between demand and supply. Demand have inverse relationship with price and supply have direct relationship with price. So variation in supply means a change in price due to change in change in quantity supplied. Change may be rise or fall in quantity supplied of commodity due to change in price, other factor remaining constant, known as variation in supply. So the first part, expansion वाढणे. Expansion of supply refers to a rise in quantity supplied due to a rise in price of commodity, rise in quantity supplied due to rise in price of commodity. Other factors which impact or which determine the supply remain constant. Expansion in supply leads to an upward movement. Expansion of supply leads to an upward movement on the same supply curve due to rise in price. For example, in graph 4.6 on y-axis we show price and on x-axis quantity supplied. Original price is P, at the same time quantity supplied is Q. But due to rise in the price from P to P1, due to rise in the price from P to P1, quantity supplied, there is expansion. Quantity supplied also rises from Q to Q1. That is expansion of supply. That is expansion of supply. Okay, I repeat, variation in supply may be rise or fall in quantity supplied due to change in its price, other things being remaining constant. That is variation in supply. Variation in supply have two types: contraction in supply and expansion of supply. Expansion, बढ़ाई होने, बढ़ा जाना. Expansion of supply refers to a rise in quantity supplied due to rise in the price of the commodity. Other factor which determine the supply remain constant. So in graph 4.6, P is the original price, Q is the original quantity supplied. When price rises from P to P1, quantity supply rises from Q to Q1 on x-axis. And expansion in supply leads to upward movement on the same supply curve due to rise in its price. It is shown in figure number 4.6. So for today I stop here. If you find any difficulty in exception and expansion of supply, then please convey the same message personally on WhatsApp group or by calling. Okay, and after watching this video you have to write down exception to the law of supply. Thanks for watching.